Good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Davis, Director of the Office of Virtual Instruction Services at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I'd like to welcome you this morning. I'm glad you're here today for our webinar on the Remote Academy application process. I'm joined by our project manager, Rachel Wright Junio. This webinar is being recorded and it will be made available along with the slides for future reference. During this time together, we will be providing an overview of legislative mandates outlined in Session Law 2022-59. We will outline the process and timeline for submitting a Remote Academy application. We'll outline how the application should be completed and inform you all of available resources. We've already shared a resource document with you all that includes an FAQ doc. That FAQ document will remain live and it will continuously be updated based on trending questions we receive from the field. Should you have questions during the webinar today that are not included on the FAQ document, you may submit your question using the link that Rachel has placed in the chat. These are the legislative provisions outlined in the law. However, we will be highlighting the bulleted item that's in bold as our focus for today. Beginning in the 2023-2024 school year, this legislation authorizes PSUs to establish remote academies that meet specific requirements. The law defines a remote academy as a public school whose instruction is provided primarily online through a combination of synchronous and asynchronous instruction delivered to students in a remote location outside of the school facility. A remote academy may include any combination of grade levels. You will notice when we look at the application that the application is laid out to mirror the legislation and encompass all the legislative requirements of a remote academy. Since we are going through the application, we have not outlined specific requirements here. However, in general, the current legislation mandates that remote academies must follow the same requirements as in-person schools, with additional remote academy specific requirements outlined in the legislation. Again, these specific requirements are included in the application. The legislation also mandates that in order to operate a remote academy, each PSU must submit a plan for approval to the State Board of Ed. That plan is the application process. Once you complete the application and the application has gone through our approval process, it will then be submitted to the State Board of Ed. Once the plan has been approved by the State Board, it is approved for a term of 5 years. After 5 years, the PSU may apply for renewal. Note that if there are changes to the plan during the 5-year term, those changes must be submitted in writing. Otherwise, the PSU must adhere to the plan that's submitted on the application. I'm going to turn things over to Rachel now, who will start talking us through how to complete the application.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the actual application completion. In that resource document that I've dropped in the chat, there is a link to a blank copy of the application as well as the sample completed application. It may be helpful for you to open up either the blank copy or the sample copy, because we will be walking through the entire application for the remainder of the webinar. I am just going to drop that sample application link separately in the chat for your reference, But again, both the blank application and the sample application are available on the resource document. So this is a basic overview of the application layout. There are 4 sections. The first 3 sections are relatively easy to complete, since the first section only requires basic information, and sections 2 and 3 are a series of confirmation checkboxes. Section 4 is where you're going to include more narrative responses that outline your remote academy plan required by section 234.15 of the law. So this is the first section of the application, which is general information. Again, I encourage you to follow along on the sample application or take notes on your copy of the blank application. On the sample application, you will notice that the minimum requirements for your responses are provided in red. Additionally, basic examples of narrative responses are provided in italicized font. The sample responses are not a comprehensive representation of acceptable responses. They're simply meant to give you some ideas of what an acceptable response might be. As we mentioned before, the application is housed in Google Forms. So the first thing you will be asked to do is indicate the State Board of Ed region your district belongs to, and then you will select your LEA. The LEA number will be right beside the LEA name, so you will not have to manually enter this information. Next, you will select if your virtual academy is an existing or a new school. You will select existing only if your academy has already been assigned a school code. You will select new if the remote academy does not have a school code, even if it is currently in operation. If you select existing, you will be taken to the next question you see on the screen, which will ask you to manually enter the school code for your existing remote academy. Continuing with the general information section, you will enter your proposed remote academy name and the names, email addresses, and phone numbers of the proposed remote academy administrators. If you indicated that you're operating an existing academy, you will be taken to the next question you see, which will ask you to provide the ADM for the 2022-2023 school year. Then all applicants will enter the projected enrollment for the 2023-2024 school year. Next, you will indicate whether your remote academy is full virtual or face virtual. You can see the descriptions of the 2 options on the screen. As the name suggests, districts should select full virtual if the school has no physical building where students meet and all instruction is virtual. You will select face virtual if the primary mode of instruction is virtual, but the school does meet with students face-to-face as part of their systematic program of virtual instruction. If you select face virtual, you will be taken to the next question, where you will be asked to provide the name and address information where physical meetings and instruction will take place. On the last question in the general information section of the application, you will check off all grades that the proposed remote academy serves or will serve. Section 2 is a confirmation section. This section requires you to check the boxes to confirm that the remote academy is meeting the enrollment requirements outlined in section 234.5 of the legislation. You must check all boxes in this section to receive approval. Take a second to read through the enrollment requirements section. Section 3 covers the general remote academy requirements outlined in section 234.10. Again, you will check all of the boxes to confirm that the remote academy is meeting the requirements to operate. The first set of requirements is related to access and technology provided to students. The next set of requirements are general requirements. Again, all boxes must be checked to confirm that the Remote Academy is meeting these requirements. The final group of requirements is related to staffing. You are required to check each box to confirm that you have sufficient staff in each of the roles listed in this section. The legislation was written to give PSUs flexibility to make decisions for what works best and is realistic in their individual context. Therefore, the legislation does not define sufficient. You will make that determination at the PSU level. I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa now to talk you through the final section of the application.
Section 4 is where you will lay out your Remote Academy plan as outlined in section 234.15. This section requires several narrative responses. The first set of questions is related to calendar compliance, enrollment, and attendance. In your response, you should outline how the Remote Academy will document and monitor those three areas. As a reminder, remote academies are required to follow the same policies as traditional schools with regards to school attendance, enrollment, and calendar compliance. You can review those policies in the North Carolina School Attendance and School Student Accounting Manual. In question D, if you are serving grades 9 through 12, you will show how you will monitor course credit accrual and progress toward graduation. In E, you will list the hardware and software that students need to participate in the Remote Academy. For F, we have listed commonly used learning management systems here. You will select the LMS the Remote Academy is using to deliver instruction. If the LMS your school is using is not listed, you should check Other and enter the name of the LMS in the space provided on the application. Here you are required to outline the source of your online content. You will provide this as a list. As you see highlighted in yellow, you will need to list out each content area separately, even if the content source is the same. Similarly, if you have one grade level that uses teacher-created content for ELA, but another grade level uses ELA content from a publisher such as Edmentum, you should list each grade level separately since the content is coming from two different sources. An example is highlighted in orange on your screen, one for each grade level that lists the online content source for that subject area. In question H, you will describe how learning will take place both synchronously and asynchronously. If the amount of synchronous versus asynchronous time will vary from grading period to grading period or semester to semester, just be sure to spell out that in your response. Additionally, if any of the synchronous instruction will take place in the face-to-face environment, please be sure to describe that as well. Once you've described how instruction will take place, in question I, you will describe the measures you are using to ensure that the instruction is supporting growth towards mastery of the standard course of study. Here you will want to include a description of common assessments the Remote Academy will use, as well as requirements around assignment completion, formative assessments, and data monitoring. Next, you will describe the professional development that will be provided to those teaching in the Remote Academy. The legislation mandates that this PD be provided to all staff who are teaching at the remote academy, and that the content of the PD must be specifically related to remote and virtual instructional pedagogy. Questions K through O are related to admission and parent communication about the admission process and requirements. As outlined in the legislation, all remote academies are required to have admission criteria. One of those criteria is that the remote academy secures written consent from parents prior to a student's enrollment. In your response to this question, you will need to make a statement that affirms you are collecting written parental consent as part of the remote academy admission application. Then you will list other criteria required for a student to be admitted to the remote academy. Next, you will list the identified characteristics for successful remote learning at the remote academy. Again, these characteristics are defined by the PSU and not by DPI. Therefore, there is no minimum requirement for the number of characteristics that need to be provided. However, these must be made publicly available. Therefore, you will also provide links to any public-facing materials that communicate these characteristics with prospective students and caregivers. Here, you will describe the training and resources that you provide to students enrolling in the remote academy. At a minimum, you should include the following: a description of training and resources provided to students to ensure the success of the remote academy, examples of student strategies for success in the remote academy, affirmation that the student code of conduct is included in orientation materials, affirmation that academic integrity is addressed in orientation materials, and affirmation that the acceptable use policy is included in orientation materials. Additionally, you will need to provide links of student and parent training that support your response. On the sample application, you will notice that the sample response provides you with several examples that demonstrate the minimum requirements that are not included on this slide. So please make sure you take some time to read through those examples. Questions N and O both ask you to describe how certain requirements will be communicated to parents or guardians. You will need to provide links as proof that this information is publicly available. In question M, you will describe how information about admission requirements is communicated to caregivers. In question N, you will describe how the characteristics of a successful remote academy are communicated with caregivers. You may provide the same link or links in your response to question N that you did in question K. The last two questions are optional. You will only complete them if you are providing transportation or nutrition services to students attending the remote academy. Please note that this does mean any transportation or school nutrition service, including services that might be provided during optional in-person days or state-mandated testing. Next, we'll move on to the submission process and timeline. Rachel's going to take over from here to cover this information.
So the timeline for submission, we are currently accepting applications on a rolling basis. The application is linked on that resource document that we provided for you. One suggestion that we have is that you complete the blank application, since the formal application is submitted through Google Forms. It will probably be easier for you all to type out especially those narrative responses, and that way you can just copy it and paste it directly into the form that you'll submit to us for approval. All applications are due no later than December 2nd for remote academies that plan to operate during the 2023-2024 school year. Once you submit your application, your regional virtual instruction consultant will review it and provide you with feedback within 10 business days. If corrections are required, you will be notified via email and will have 2 business days to make corrections and resubmit. Your consultant will then do a second review within 2 business days and provide you any additional feedback if needed. After your application has been approved by your virtual instruction consultant, DPI leadership will conduct a final review for approval. After leadership approves, applications will be submitted to the State Board of Ed sometime in early 2023 for final approval. So after State Board approval, the remote academy may operate for a period of 5 years. Additionally, after that approval, remote academies that do not have a school code may request one. More information will be provided to approved remote academies about requesting a school code once State Board approval is secured. So finally, we'd like to provide you with points of contact for the application process. The regional virtual instruction consultants will serve as your main points of contact, and I'm going to drop the link to their contact information in the chat, but it's also linked on the slide and it's also linked on our resource document. Please open that slide deck and make note of your regional consultant's contact information. To provide additional support, Melissa and I will be splitting the state in half to support our regional consultants as needed with any questions. Melissa will be supporting the West, which is regions 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I will be supporting the East, which are regions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Our contact information is on this slide, so please take note of that as well. I will turn it back over to Melissa to wrap us up for today.
So again, thank you all for meeting with us this morning. We hope you found this information helpful. We know it's a new process and we want to support you the best way we possibly can, so don't hesitate to reach out. If you have questions, the link to the Google form is in the chat. You can submit your questions there, and the trending questions will be added to the FAQ document. We look forward to working with you. Don't forget, the webinar recording will be made available to you in the resource document along with the slides from the webinar. Thank you again, and we look forward to working with you during this application process. I hope you all have a great day.